Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first webinar in John Carroll University's Financial Aid webinar series. This one's called Financial Aid 101. I'm Carolyn Nolsorg, Vice President for Enrollment at John Carroll, and I'll be your host. I'm joined by my colleague, Claudia Wenzel. Claudia serves as our Assistant Vice President for Enrollment and Financial Services, and she leads the financial aid and student service teams that will work with you and your student from this point all the way through graduation. And Claudia is a JCU grad herself. She has years of experience with college financial aid and affordability, and she's a really sought after speaker on the topics you're going to learn about from her today. This conversation is the first in a 5-part virtual series about the financial aid process, the value and outcomes of your investment in a John Carroll education, and the logistical aspects of joining this community. So let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the mic over to Claudia, who will first make sure that we're all using the same terms and understand the formulas that determine your eligibility for financial aid. She'll then introduce you to the many types of aid that work together to create your financial aid award. And after that, she'll explore John Carroll's process and timelines, including some really important information about the FAFSA. We'll wrap up by helping you make a plan for your next steps. And at the end, we will respond to your questions. If you're watching this live, please use the Q&A panel in Zoom throughout the webinar to send those questions, and I'll use them to moderate a discussion with Claudia at the end. If you're catching this recorded version later on, or if we can't get to your question live, please know you can always contact your admission counselor. You can find their contact information in your MyJCU Gateway portal. And we'll also share Claudia's email address at the end so you can get to her directly. And so with that, let me turn it over to Claudia to get us started.
Thanks, Carolyn, and welcome everyone. My guess is that many of you are sitting there a little anxious and a little overwhelmed by the whole financial aid process. And so what I often say to families is the best way to conquer that fear is to get as much information as possible. So tonight, what we really want to do is walk you through this process from the very basic understanding of what financial aid is, what those terms are, what you can be prepared for, and what to look for in the process. So like any new subject, we're going to start with the definition. And the definition of financial aid is pretty self-explanatory, but it really is any type of resource that helps you pay for college. And it can come from a variety of forms and take a variety of sources and can be awarded for lots of different reasons. But primarily, it's really all about the resources that are available to make college affordable for you. There's a formula, and the formula seems pretty simplistic, a simple math formula that isn't quite so simple. So let's kind of break that down and talk through this process. It starts with the cost of attendance or the cost of education at a given institution. It also looks at the student aid index. That student aid index is driven through the FAFSA, and that determines your eligibility for financial need. Now that formula, again, seems really simple math, but we're going to take it and break it down a little bit. Let's start with the cost of attendance. Your cost of attendance is made up of 2 components: your direct expenses that you actually receive a bill for, things that you would expect, tuition, fees, room, your meal plan. Those are your direct expenses, what you will get a bill for. Included in that cost of attendance are also indirect expenses, things that are going to vary from student to student. Books and supplies, transportation, personal expenses. All of those will be very different per student and not billed directly from the institution. So what I've listed for you here is John Carroll's 25-26 cost of education, most importantly, our direct expenses. Now, I know that number seems really scary and can be really frightening, but it's important to understand that no one at John Carroll pays that dollar amount. That is really what we use to determine your cost of attendance and your eligibility. But because of the generosity of our donors and our legacy our alumni, we have a wealth of resources to make that cost more affordable. The SAI is that second part of that formula, and that's really where families get overwhelmed with, because that SAI is a number that is derived by the federal government. It's based on what you complete on the free application for federal student aid, and it is made up of both the student contribution and the parent contribution. And it's going to look at information, both income and assets that you supply. It's important to understand that that SAI stays the same regardless of what institution you apply to. So you think about it as a little bubble above your head. That SAI goes with you from institution to institution. So if you think back to our formula of need, what really drives your need or your eligibility is the cost of education. And at the higher cost education institutions, you're probably going to be more eligible for aid because of that exact same purpose of that cost. So let's dig a little bit into what that SAI is and how it's calculated. For our incoming freshmen or fall of 25 freshmen, we're going to be looking at prior year. That's for you, that's the 2023 tax year. It's already in the books. Your tax returns are done, so it's easy to report. And it will actually be reported directly through your connection with the IRS. So it'll actually look at your adjusted gross income, your taxes paid, as well as your family size. What you will report based on the date that you complete the FAFSA are your assets as well. And keep in mind, these are assets for both students and parents. It's important to understand more than anything what you don't include. You're not going to include the home, your place of residence, your primary place of residence. You're also not going to include any qualified retirement accounts, anything like your IRA, your KEO, your annuity, your pensions. All of those are excluded from the federal formula. What you do include instead are things like your cash and saving accounts, your business, your farm. If you're receiving child support, that's reported as an asset. Also 529s. If you have a 529 for the student that you're applying for, you're going to include that as a value based on who owns that 529. So again, that formula, that calculation is including all the data elements that you supply through the FAFSA. And that's what helps determine what your eligibility for need-based is. So we talked a little bit about that formula for need. Let's talk about the categories and how that actually determines your eligibility. Need-based, as we just defined, is created through that cost of education formula. You also can qualify for non-need-based aid. That's aid that you have no connection to finances for. Regardless of financial status, you could be eligible for non-need-based aid. Think about things like scholarships or grants. Those are all awarded not on a family's financial status, but the qualities that the student brings to the table and brings to the campus. Regardless of the categories, it falls into types. You're looking at two distinctly different types of financial aid, self-help and gift aid. And it might sound a little self-explanatory, but it's important to understand the distinction. Gift aid is money you have no obligation to repay. It can be titled scholarships, it can be titled grants. Sometimes they'll have a different naming convention for it, but regardless, you want to understand that that is non-repayable assistance, money you have no obligation for. Flip side of that is self-help funding, funding that you have either to repay in the form of loans or that you earn in the form of work study. All types of aid is all going to be utilized to help you determine that cost of education and help meet your need. It comes from a variety of sources as well. It can come from the federal government, from the state. College and university is going to be your primary resources for assistance. And there's also private sources of aid that we can explore a little bit as well. If we think about the federal student aid process, you're going to certainly think about need-based aid. It's primarily going to be based on financial need. So it's going to be based on your free application for federal student aid. It is going to have very distinct and eligibility requirements. It's coming from the federal government. They're setting the requirements and they're setting the eligibility. It's primarily geared to our most neediest of families. And those are things like the federal Pell Grant, Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, and the federal Work Study Program. It also offers self-help funds in the term of federal loans. Many of us have heard about the direct student loans or perhaps a Parent Plus loan. Those are all loans or resources that can help from the federal government help you fund a college education. State funding, likewise, is oftentimes based not only on your residency within the state, but also on your need. So we'll look at your FAFSA as a primary documentation. State, however, does offer some funding that is not need-based. It's often based on merit. There's a governor's merit scholarships. There are funds that are devoted to veterans. There are funds that are devoted if you were an adopted child. There's an opportunity there. Choose Ohio First funds. There's a safety officer memorial. Later on in the presentation, I supplied some links where you can really dig into the types of aid that are available both at the state and the federal level, so you can really understand what you might be eligible for. What's important to understand is in both of those programs, there might be the additional applications. So I want to make sure that you're not missing anything, especially from the state avenue. As we think about all the different types of aid, as I mentioned earlier, your aid that's coming from an institution is primarily going to be your largest source of funding. At John Carroll, we are blessed with an awful lot of support from our donors, from our alumni, and from friends who support the goal to fund a John Carroll education at a reasonable price. So when we look at our aid, we look at both need and non-need based aid. Oftentimes your FAFSA is your first document that we're going to make sure that you're maximizing all your eligibility. But there's also specific opportunities that require a separate application. Those are all listed for you on our website. Your merit scholarship really becomes the foundation of your award. So for those of you who recently got accepted, first of all, congratulations. But in addition, you may have also received your merit scholarship. That's not the end of the story necessarily, but it is the foundation that is awarded to you regardless of your financial situation. It is awarded to you based on what you bring to the table through your academic performance, your leadership, your service. Those are all merit scholarships that determine really where you start your journey in financial aid. Additional, there's a discovery grant. We have a legacy award as well. And we also have additional funding that can be awarded to a student based on the receipt of their FAFSA through our John Carroll Grant Program, through our donor funding. And regardless of your eligibility for federal work study, John Carroll offers an institutional student employment program. John Carroll has over 1,000 students who are working on campus right now. And we find that the institutional student employment plan, along with the federal work study program, really provides an opportunity for students not necessarily to fund their education, but to gain valuable knowledge and resources and really stay connected to the institution. So there's a little plug for student employment, but I just wanted to mention those opportunities as well. Finally, private sources of aid. There are an awful lot of scholarships out there. They just require a little bit of work, a little bit of time, and a little bit of dedication. Foundations, businesses, churches, organizations, we even offer private lenders sometimes will offer scholarships. The best place to start in that private scholarship journey is through your guidance office. They're going to be your best source of aid. They're going to be able to guide you through resources and sites where you can learn what you might be eligible for. I've also listed for you links of scholarship searches that we know are reputable. They have been very successful for families. And these will not necessarily provide a scholarship for you, but they will give you a place to start and apply. The secret to success in private scholarship searches is making sure that you start early and you do not miss deadlines. So now is a great time to start looking at opportunities, doing a little research, getting your applications in, and be ready, because there's a lot of funding available. It does require a little bit of work though. So now that we've kind of walked you through that entire process of financial aid, I want to walk you through the John Carroll process. Really, it starts with your application for admissions. For those of you who have recently been accepted, again, congratulations. We're excited to see you as part of our family, but we also want to make sure that you understand, if you haven't yet been accepted, what that process looks like. We will start releasing admissions decisions within 3 to 4 weeks of application. All of that is kind of a hurry up and wait game. So you're looking to complete your application. You're waiting for your acceptance. Once you receive your acceptance, you will receive your merit scholarship. Again, that is the foundation of your award. It is not the final award. We're going to wait till we receive your FAFSA. And for those of you who have been through this process before, you are well aware that the FAFSA has had some challenges in the last year. I'm happy to report that based on what we have done in terms of research and testing, we are pretty confident that the FAFSA will be good to go this year. It will be available December 1st officially. There is a small group of beta testing that's still going on now, but the FAFSA will be available December 1st. and we will make sure that you are aware when it's open so that you can start that process. Once you complete your FAFSA, we are waiting for those results. And once we receive that information, we will be looking to create a full package for you. And that full package will include things like federal funding if you're eligible, state funding, your merit scholarship, as well as any additional John Carroll funding. It will include things like your grants, your scholarships, both a combination of self-help and institutional gift assistance. That award will be released mid-January. That's our goal, is to start releasing financial aid awards mid-January. Once you get that award, the next step is really connecting with your admissions counselor and making sure that you understand that award, because there's a lot to consider on that. We also know that as you sit there and look at this timeline, it seems like a lot of waiting. And if you're anxious, there's lots of things that you can be doing now to prepare and to be in a good place. So come December 1, you're ready to go. The first is to start preparing for the FAFSA. Understand who completes the FAFSA. Make sure that you get the information and the access so that you can officially sign off so that your FSA ID is completed and certified, and start collecting the documentation that you need. When you think about who completes the FAFSA, that's probably the biggest hurdle many families have. Exactly who should complete that FAFSA, whose information is needed. The federal government has given us a chart that I think is really helpful to understanding who should be ready to complete that application. If you look at it, it kind of guides you through this. If parents, either adoptive or biological, have never been married, then the parent who provides the most financial support during the last 12 months is required to complete the FAFSA. If you're truly in a situation where you are 50-50 in terms of support, then the parent who provides the largest amount of money or has the greatest income is required to file that FAFSA. If parents are unmarried and living together, both legal parents are required to file that FAFSA. The same for married parents. If you are remarried, either after being widowed or divorced, then the parent and the step-parent is required to file that FAFSA. Divorced or separated follows the same rules as never married. It is the parent who provides the greatest amount of support in the last 12 months. And if you are in a 50-50 situation and it's equal amounts of support, then it is the parent that has the largest income and assets. And of course, for a widow, it is just the surviving parent. If, however, either in a divorce or widowed, it's important to remember both the parent and the step-parent is required to supply information on the FAFSA. So once you know who is required, the next step is to make sure that you have the information you need to complete that FAFSA. And the best source of information is your FSA ID. For families who've already completed the FAFSA, either previously for an older child or even perhaps for yourself, your FSA ID is still valid. You have it, think of it as your signature. It gives you your security access to complete that FAFSA. If you haven't done it yet, you are going to need an FSA ID for each parent who is required to submit information on the application, as well as the student. It seems like that is the secret to success in the FAFSA. And in our testing, both this year and last year, families who got their FSA ID and were able to completely successfully acquire that were the most successful in filing the FAFSA. It just made the process easier. So what I've listed for you here is a step-by-step instructions on how to go about completing that FSA ID. This is something you can do as easily as today or tonight. But before you sit down to file the FAFSA, my best advice for you is to have an FSA ID for everyone who is required to submit information on the FAFSA. Within this presentation, there is a link that we've created an FSA ID guide that allows you to submit your information, write down all those details, and have it readily available in your folder. But I want to give you a couple tips that many families miss. The first thing to consider is every individual should have a distinct email account. So as a family, if you use a family email account, you're going to want to create a distinct email for each individual. You're also going to want to create a distinct username. And you want to make sure that especially for the students, they're not using their high school email account. That can be problematic moving forward. because you will need to complete this FAFSA each and every year, and you want to make sure that they still have the ability to access their FSA ID should they forget it. And if it's sent to an email that is no longer current, you will get caught in a loop that's going to be really hard to get out of. So if you sit down before the holidays and get your FSA ID using all those tips, you're going to be in a really good situation come December 1st to sit down and file your FAFSA. And all you'll need is the information that we have here for you. You'll need the Social Security number for both the student and the parents. You'll need email addresses, certainly date of births. You'll need your completed tax return. This form is actually matched with the IRS, but it's good to have that tax return at the ready just in case you have a question or you need some information. It's just nice to have. You will need your asset and the investment information as of the day you file the FAFSA, as well as your business, farm value, and then your records of child support. Collecting all that information will make the process of filing the FAFSA really simple and easy. We've estimated that if you have all this information and you're ready and able to sit down, the FAFSA should take you no longer than about 30 minutes. So be prepared is the secret to success. So as we talk through the process, as Carolyn mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we are with you every step of the way. And I know it can be confusing. I know it's overwhelming. And we're going to break this down into small increments. So today was just the very high level understanding of financial aid. The next webinar that we want to walk you through is a little deeper dive into the FAFSA, understanding that. And I'm really excited about our financial aid seminar that we're going to hold on campus on January 11th. At this seminar, our entire staff is available to assist you, walk you through, answer any unusual questions or things that are a little different for your family, because we know that the application can be really black and white, but every family is a little different and requires a little bit of care and understanding, and that's what we're here for. So that financial aid seminar will also give us, in case you haven't filed the FAFSA yet, we can walk you through that line by line and make sure that you understand it. There also is going to be some great information for students to participate in a financial literacy program. So I encourage you, if you haven't done that yet, to register for our financial aid seminar. We're also going to have a webinar series where once you get your award, we're going to walk you through it, make sure that you understand how to read that award, how to look at it, and then we're also going to walk you through why a John Carroll education is worth it, and then finally, what are your next steps to make that award that you have on paper a reality on your billing statement. As I promised, here are your links for Student Aid Gov and your Ohio State Grant and Scholarship page. These are great resources. And your number one resource through this entire process is your admissions counselor. So don't hesitate to reach out to them. They are here to help you, as our entire staff is. So with that, I ran through this really quickly, but hopefully you got enough information, and I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn so that we can answer any of your questions. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Claudia. And we've got a few coming in, and I want to start with some question or maybe clarification about whose names various things should be in, the student or the parent. So question about student loans, student savings, the student as a contributor, maybe a little bit of advice there on that.
So let's start with the FAFSA. As a FAFSA, the student is required to report anything that is in their name and social security number. So that's assets. That's any type of asset: cash, savings, checking accounts, mutual funds, stocks, or bonds. From a 529 perspective, you're only reporting the asset on whoever owns that asset. So think about mom and dad. If you have a 529 that you have for all three of your children, you are the owner, but you're only going to report the 529 that you have listed as this particular student as a beneficiary. So from a FAFSA perspective, you're going to report however you have it listed and owned as. From a loan perspective, you have a lot of opportunities in loans. The primary loan that you're going to be looking at is your federal loan, and that's going to be awarded in the student's name. If you think about it, what 18-year-old can get a loan with a very low, reasonable interest, have no cosigner, no debt to income ratio, and really no income to speak of, no credit history. That's a great way to establish financial literacy and a credit history. So those loans will primarily be in the student's name. Anything beyond the federal loan will probably require a cosigner or be required to be in the parent name. So there's some options there for you.
Thanks, Claudia. This one's quick, so I'll handle it and then I'll hand the next one to you. Does John Carroll accept or expect the CSS profile? And the answer is no, we do not. We use just the FAFSA. So this is going to be your key form for your financial aid process at John Carroll. And Claudia, one for you. How do they check if they already have an FSA ID?
Oh, great question. That website that we listed on that slide is also going to be an opportunity for you to determine if you have an FSA ID on file. One of the boxes on that form will be, I want to refresh or I want to confirm my FSA ID. So if you have one previously, you can use that information and they will confirm if you have one. If you already have one, no need to reapply.
And Claudia, just to clarify, if we have married parents or we have a situation where we have two contributors in addition to the student, do both need their own FSA ID?
Yeah, that is a change to the process, but each will need their own distinct FSA ID. So think of it this way: if you are required to submit information on the FAFSA, you are required to have an FSA ID.
And Claudia, this one comes up a bit. What if the 529 plan is owned by a grandparent?
Legally, you are not required to report it because you are only reporting the assets for the contributors of the FAFSA.
Thank you very much. We have a couple minutes for any other questions that you may have. Great questions so far. Okay, here's another one for us about scholarships. If a student receives outside scholarships, does that change anything they receive from John Carroll?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question, and one you should ask time and time again. Our policy is outside scholarships are only in addition to our award. The only time we would reduce any type of aid would be self-help aid. So if you're in a situation where you're beyond need, we would adjust your loan or your work study, but we would never touch any opportunities of aid that we've awarded to you through John Carroll.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got a question about the student. Does the student need an FSA ID?
Absolutely. That's the most important person to have an FSA ID.
Here's one that maybe this is a little bit lingering trauma from last year, but the FAFSA seems to be open now, but should we wait till December 1st?
Well, we're keeping this under wraps because the FAFSA is open, but it's in a beta testing mode. So my advice to families is wait until the official opening, which is December 1st. No harm if you do it, but I would suggest you wait. Let them get the kinks out.
Yep, I agree. Okay, here's a quick one. If parents are married, but only one parent works, do they both need that FSA ID?
They both need that FSA ID because they are both contributors. Even if their income is zero, they are still listed on that tax return as a contributor.
All right, let's see. We got some other good ones here. A couple on 529s. If the student has a 529 plan, does that make our award decrease? And what if both the student and parents are listed on the 529? Who would claim those dollars?
Well, let's start with the last part of that question. You would claim the FAFSA, you would report a 529 based on the owner. Typically, you have an owner and a beneficiary. What I've always seen is that the parent is the owner and the student is identified as the beneficiary. In the event that is not the case, which I don't know that actually you can title a 529 like that, it would be split evenly between the parent and the student. In terms of how that affects your award, that is considered an asset and is evaluated as part of your SAI formula. So it doesn't necessarily determine your eligibility for aid or deter from your eligibility for aid, but it is calculated as part of your SAI. John Carroll doesn't know what you have in terms of 529 versus asset. So we don't know the distinction of what type of asset you are reporting on your FAFSA.
Claudia, here's just an advice-seeking question about starting the FAFSA. Who should start first, the student or the parent?
Another great question, and it's a great tip. My advice is let the student start first. If you start with the student using their FSA ID, the process is much easier.
Wonderful. We're right at our time, so I think we will take one more question, and that is, when we think about the assets in student's name versus parent's name, is there any difference in the formula if more assets are attributed to the student versus the parent or the other way around?
There is a slight difference in the calculation in the formula, and I think the way to look at it is the way the federal government looks at it, is that a student's assets are really going to be utilized for their education primarily, where a parent's assets are being utilized for many things, including retirement, including savings, all of those things. So it's going to weigh a little heavier if a student owns those assets than if a parent.
Claudia, let me pitch you one more quick one because I
Yeah.
think this is one that might be of interest to all, and then we'll wrap up. Um, will the student be able to see the dollar amounts that the parents are putting into the FAFSA form?
Actually, interesting question, but if you're matching with the IRS, no one sees those figures. Your asset information, however, is visible if it's their FAFSA, so they will have that information available for them to view.
Wonderful. I recognize that we ran out of time and didn't get to every question. So I want to, first of all, thank all of our attendees this evening for joining this session, for Claudia for sharing her expertise. And Claudia's email address is on the screen. It's cwenzel@jcu.edu. You can reach out to her with any of those specific questions about this process or the logistics. You can tell she is a wealth of knowledge on this topic. And your admission counselors are also standing by to support you through this aid process. So it's our pleasure to work with you this year. We hope to see you on campus soon, and thanks for your attention tonight.
Thanks, everyone.